Well, I would say that both sides have taken the majoritarian principles of the Constitution, basically whoever has the most votes wins, and used it to advance their philosophies. I mean, we saw that in the George W. Bush years, where a Republican form of heavy, oppressive, civil liberty assaulting government came about. And we see it now in the Barack Obama years, where a left-wing, oppressively left-wing form of civil liberties assaulting, taxing, regulating government has come about. Very few presidents, I can think of Thomas Jefferson and Grover Cleveland, respected the Constitution to the point where they summarily vetoed legislation that their parties wanted because it was clearly not authorized by, didn't generate from the Constitution, or contravened the natural law. The problem with majoritarianism, that the majority always gets its way, is that it frequently forgets the natural law. That is, that we have certain rights by virtue of our humanity, whether those rights or the exercise of them is popular or not. So even though I have found myself voting for the more conservative candidate, and sometimes it's a reluctant vote because there's only two or maybe three or four from among whom to choose, conservatives, so-called conservatives, have been just as guilty of this as liberals. I think secession and nullification are valid for a couple of reasons, and it does not deter me when people refer to those of us who believe in this as wingnuts. It is clear that when a person resurrects an old idea or even comes up with a new one that challenges the authority of the establishment, and the establishment has little intellectual argument against the idea, they will attack the originator or the proponent of the idea. So the name-calling is to be expected. What is also clear is that the framers understood and respected and accepted as a given the concept of secession and nullification. Thomas Jefferson, while he was vice president to John Adams, encouraged, successfully I might add, the legislature of the state of Virginia to enact legislation threatening to secede if Adams and the Federalist Congress enacted certain pieces of legislation. And in fact, every time Virginia threatened to do this, the Congress responded by removing the offending part of the legislation from what they were going to enact. No one said, you don't have the right to leave. Once you've joined, you're in forever. Now, I'm not unaware of the argument that most of my colleagues in the law make, that the Civil War changed everything. I reject that. Might does not make right. Lincoln slaughtered 650,000 people, not to free the slaves, but because he was denied the income from the tariffs of the goods at the various ports from Wilmington, Delaware to Houston, Texas. The concept that a piece of legislation voluntarily entered into by a state legislature could not be undone is absurd. Of course it can be undone. The last time this was looked at by the Supreme Court is a case called Texas against White, which is about 10 or 15 years after the Supreme Court, and in what lawyers call dicta, basically a statement in a case not germane to the outcome of it, but a statement from the court nevertheless. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, whose name was White, said, well, it would seem that if 3/4 of the states agreed to the departure of one of them, that state could depart. Where did he get 3/4 from? It takes 3/4 of the state legislatures to amend the Constitution. But joining the Constitution, the Union, and leaving the Union are not acts that require the consent of the other states. So I disagree. The political effect of this is the more interesting one. The more states that threaten to leave, and the more states that threaten to nullify, that is, refuse to allow the enforcement of unconstitutional federal laws within their states, the more judges will take note. There's an old one-liner that judges read election returns. They just read them a year or two after the election, meaning it takes a while for a popular movement to catch up with the judiciary. If many, many states threaten to leave, or many, many states purport to nullify federal legislation, eventually people who think this way will become judges, and this will become part of the fabric of our law. Freedom Watch has been surprisingly successful. It is among young people, it is among college students, it is among constitutionalists, it is among libertarians, it is even among people who you couldn't really put a finger on what they are ideologically or politically. They're just generally fed up with the government and they like to hear said the things that, that we say there. I mean, I myself am a Mises Rothbardian, Ron Paul libertarian. I don't hold back. And even many libertarians on air, like some of my colleagues, do hold back for the sake of political correctness. So one of the reasons that Freedom Watch is so successful is true believers can go there to get their dose of raw liberty. I don't want to sound like I'm selling the program, but that's what it is. My bosses at Fox have been very happy with it and have encouraged me to keep putting it out there in the same way that we've been doing. I think it's a lot more respectable politically to be a libertarian. I myself have always loved the thoughts and ideas and even the irreverent way he sometimes expressed them of Barry Goldwater, and I've articulated that throughout my youth and adult life. Until recently, that always was met with sort of a mocking derisiveness, but now those theories are being taken seriously, in large measure because of the intellect and personal courage of Congressman Ron Paul, who is a latter-day Barry Goldwaterite with somewhat more sophistication and certainly a far better command of economic issues than Senator Goldwater had. But the beauty of Ron Paul, and the reason I emphasize courage, is he votes the way a freedom-loving individual should under our constitutional form of government, no matter how unpopular that may be. Because he led the way, because he broke the ice, millions will follow and it will be a lot easier to do it. I was at the first CPAC before you were born. There were no libertarians here. Everybody was sort of a social conservative. And the first CPAC had 125 people here and it was laughed at and maybe got a paragraph in the New York Times. Big deal, a bunch of conservatives got together because they didn't like the fact that Richard Nixon went to China. That was the era. So you can see how the times have changed. The Tea Party movement, the socialist impulses of the present government, the courage of Ron Paul, all these things combine to make it easier, more attractive to be an individualist, a constitutionalist, a libertarian. And you see that by the presence of everyone who believes that that's here in Washington with us today. Well, I'm crazy about him, so it's difficult for me to be fair. But just taking a step back from my own personal involvement with him, I mean, he has articulated so clearly and consistently the building blocks of freedom in a way that is appealing to people that had been generally unfamiliar with it. That though his ideas are not yet accepted by the mainstream, they are talked about by the mainstream. He's always smarter than the people he's debating against. When he said at the now infamous Republican debate that the terrorists didn't attack us because they don't like our way of life, they attacked us because we're over there, and Mayor Giuliani went crazy, Ron Paul, without losing his cool, said, read the 9/11 report. You were on the 9/11 Commission. Did you read your own report? It says right there, it's the government's official version. We were attacked because we're there. That won him millions of supporters, the cool, calm, historically, technically accurate way in which he said that. He also has not only the gift of courage, but the gift of explaining complex issues in a manner that everyday folks can understand. I mean, I do not remember a time in my lifetime when people on the street were talking about the Fed. Suddenly they are, in large measure, because of Congressman Paul. And they know the insidious way in which the Fed has stolen from us and continues to do so, in large measure, because of Congressman Paul. Everybody knows that FDR confiscated gold, but it wasn't until Ron Paul came along that people understand the long-term harm caused by that.